so we've finished we had our hot dog. And let's talk about what developed operas, Monteverdi including, but then as it gets settled, and Handel and into Mozart and into all these names that you've heard of, are number operas. What that means is they have, and this is true for Broadway. You open, if you buy, let's say you buy the score of Sound of Music or of Fiddler on the Roof I mentioned, or of, I can't think of any of them, South Pacific, any of these, Carousel, you'll see the overture. These are the types of numbers. You'll see the overture that's open. It might be a piano score that you could sit down the piano and play, from the French to open, ouvrir, right? The piece of music that opens it. We just saw and heard the toccata, the playing, the warming up, marvelous. Well, you're going to have that melody in your head tonight, right? At any rate, from Monteverdi, for the very first time, kind of doing this, not the very first time, but almost. And that whole tradition of having an orchestral opening. Then what you're going to have is a progression of preset forms all the way through from 1630s, 40s, 50s, 60s, until you really get to the middle of the 19th century when things will change. The form will stay pretty set until the middle of the 19th century. There'll still be orchestral openings, although that'll change in the 20th. They'll be called other things, preludes. Wagner will do that. Wagner's coming. The ingredients are the most important in a number opera in the 150 years that really set the whole thing up. There's two things, the recitatives and the arias. So let's talk about recitative just a moment. Recitative is to say the prose action of the story, the details, the information, the storytelling, the narration, the dialogue in a free-floating prosaic rhythm above a dry accompaniment. Technology, it has so many problems. I'm never quite sure what the thing will be, no matter how much I rehearse it in the beginning. Everything works fine, everything works fine, everything works fine. Then we go to do it, and something's wrong. I never know what's going to happen next time. Do you? But we'll see. Now that's a recitative. And I had all kinds of fast and slow and things going on in there, right? And you could have it with just the harpsichord and the gamba or the cello. That's usually what they had, a harpsichord or a keyed instrument or a lute. You saw lutes just a minute ago. And you could get all the, oh, the king is dead. Oh, no, the king's not really dead. Oh, I think the king's here. Oh, I don't know. All this stuff would go back and forth. And then when they got all the back and forth stuff done, you know, I'll go back to why I had that figure in a moment if I get to it. You know, you could also have it with violins, with flutes, with different instruments. If it were the king doing the recitative, the king got more instruments. If it's just the maid coming in to say that someone is downstairs and they absolutely will not wait to see the king, it would just be the harpsichord sound, okay? Dry or secco, which is like the harpsichord and one sustaining instrument underneath, or more instruments for the more important characters. But where that's informational, the arias were giving you the emotions. The aria is a song. What differentiates them? They have a pulse. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And they don't have much text. It's all emotion. Lament the fact that we cannot be together now. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Be together. I only said about 5 words. I had a pulse. I had a melody of sort. It wasn't a lot of information. It was all emotion. And there were all kinds of arias that developed. There's the heroic aria with rage I shall burn my, that's actually from an oratorio, it doesn't matter. There's rage arias, there's lamenting arias, there's vaction arias, there's the flirtatious arias. They have all these Italian names. Over time, these aria types get set. And a composer looked at a plot, prima le parole, dopo la musica. Got the libretto, prima le parole, dopo la musica. Said, okay, I'm going to need a an angry aria here. I'm going to need a couple of love arias here with some sentimental, some anger, some lamenting. And they had set forms, and we don't have time to go into all the forms. That's part 2 boot camp. But they weren't very many different possibilities, but nobody cared because it was great. Just as any kind of drama, it has patterns. So the arias were the focus, and they will stay the focus really until this day. Are we good with that for the moment? So we have the recitative with all the stuff going on with the information. We have the arias with the pulse, with the emotion, and all that coloratura singing if it's in the Baroque styles. Then we had duets and trios and quartets that would arise, and ensembles that were bigger. Those of you who watched Chin got to hear quartets, quintets, sextets, septets. What can be more fun as the weeks go on, as the years go on, as the decades go on, this stuff gets more and more elaborate, because in opera, not in straight theater, not in a Shakespeare or an Ibsen play or Henry Miller or whatever, you could have 2, 3, 4 plus characters, 5, 6 characters singing unique thoughts more or less simultaneously, and they can all be heard. You cannot do that without music. That's one of the great things about it. The faster, the better. Or the more emotional, the better. Okay? And then you'd had choruses and instrumental numbers, storm scenes, and all kinds of crazy things that come out of the commedia dell'arte tradition. Every Rossini opera's got to have a storm scene in it, and usually something that shouldn't happen. Somebody sneaks out or sneaks up or sneaks away, or something crazy happens. And ballet, which brings me to the French. One of you asked about the French, right? You asked about the French? Okay. The French. We haven't mentioned the French. And they are the other big force in opera as it develops. Later on, the Germans are going to have a lot to say. The Russians are going to have a lot to say. The Danes are going to have something to say. The Brits are going to have something to say. It's the Italian and the French that matter first. The French opera will be different because it will be based on the fact that there's a guy named Louis XIV, and actually the whole court before that. The language is different for one thing, and very different feeling to French. And Louis XIV picked up the tradition of dance. You may know that. There's wonderful films about his court. Some of them are very much adult films too, by the way. It was not a PG world or a G world at court of Louis XIV, or really probably anybody's court. Thank you. We know that, right? But the art is great. At any rate, he was a court dancer, unlike, the whole Sun, he was the Sun King. You've seen some of these graphics. And the court dances were complicated. And if you couldn't do the court dances, if you couldn't do them well, then you might not have enough brain to be a commander or a diplomat. People's careers rose and fell on the dance floor. That's impossible for us to imagine. People's careers rose and fell on the dance floor. People drilled the dance. They hired dance masters so that in all of these constant social events where the eye of the king and others of the court were on the courtiers, the ability to dance with grace and precision and no mistakes, no false steps, no faux pas, F-A-U-X-P-A-S, meant that you could elevate your career at court. I'm not making that up. Don't have to. The French love of dance meant that when they did operas, there were dance scenes in them. Court dance at first, which is flat or demi-point, soft shoes or regular shoes, or what they call the mules. Where do we get the kind of shoe style? From the dancers at the French court, ladies and gentlemen. And then in the 19th century, in what we call French Grand Opera, topic in and of itself, starting with one called Robert the Devil by a guy named Meyerbeer, very good composer, 1831. Now we've jumped a lot, see? Something called point came into being. It would have done it somewhere. It did it in this opera. The first public appearance of point dancing. You know what I'm talking about, right? This. In this opera, look at the stage. Well into the opera, nuns rise from the dead at night and drift across. It was a supernatural special effect. They had the long dresses, long costumes, and they were on point. And they looked as if they floated, and people flipped out. This thing stayed a hit. Who cared about the rest of the opera? But it's not entirely true. This scene brought people to the theater for decades. It was painted. There are many famous paintings of this scene. of the dancing nuns, if you will, the ballet of the nuns. I know that sounds weird. Point dancing went from that moment, it was already being developed, and it's fascinating, to being used in its own in a ballet, used not quite the way Tchaikovsky will. It takes another 30, 40 years to get to classical ballet with all the complicated, the arabesque and the, all the jumping in the air and all that. That takes a while to develop, but being on point. And if you don't know, being on point is incredibly difficult and physically disastrously difficult. Point shoes don't last very long. Half an act. This would be after a full ballet, what your shoes would look like, maybe. If you don't know about ballet, that's this other boot camp. It is difficult and viciously difficult. And this vocabulary of movements that was developed over, particularly by the French, and then the French choreographers who moved to the Russian school, moved to work for the Russian czars to create the Russian ballet and the Danish ballet, because Denmark loved ballet. It was just certain places that ballet flourished, and the French court was the cradle of it. And French operas were filled with dance scenes, not the Italian operas, the French operas. Okay, I have to leave that topic because I got to go to the fourth thing I wanted to bring up that people object to about operas. I'm going to do this really fast, really fast. We might have to go 5 minutes over. We started 5 minutes late. I hope that's going to be all right with people. This is good. Are you ready if we go fast? I remember thinking opera singers all look like this. It's so unfair because she was a great Valkyrie. I'm not going to get into any, but I'd love to tell you the stories of all these people. Opera singers, yuck. Let me tell you, there might have been a time when we look back at the old pictures and they didn't look that way to the people back then, but opera singers are divas, and they really were from the beginning. There's something special. They're like quarterbacks. They're like star pitchers. They're like, the top of the top physically in their game. And we can look, there's no time to talk about these people. There's some very famous names like Jenny Lind. Some of you all with your teenagers may be looking for something marvelous called the Swedish Nightingale, who came to New York and filled hall after hall, made a bunch of money singing coloratura for the adoring crowd. You'd never heard anybody sing like that. You think when you were a settler in the 1840s, 50s in your wagon trains or, in the cities back then, you'd heard people singing like that? It was crazy wild. These singers were so celebrated. They were the stars. And they even had foods named after them. Here's Nellie Melba. You ever heard of Peach Melba? Named after her. Here was tetrazzini. You ever had chicken or turkey tetrazzini? Oh, there's a lot of stuff like this. Too much fun. And of course, opera singers all start out as young girls. I'm showing off the fact that I had the extraordinary experience of knowing two of the many singers who came out of SMU who have made just really big careers. Oh my gosh, I would love to tell you about a lot more of them. This young lady, Laura Claycomb, who became this young lady, who sings all over the world now. This young lady, I don't have a picture of her as a little kid, Beth Clayton, again, singing all over the world. They kind of looked like that when they came to class. Well, she looked kind of a little bit like in the middle. Remember, these are people that just dream about a career. And a very small percentage of people get that career. Those of you who saw Cenerentola saw Joyce DiDonato. I think we don't have time to do this very well. I'll just show you what you're missing. Let me show you what you're missing, because Shaliapin, the great Russian bass, who was a huge star in the early recording era, who was painted by some of the most wonderful Russian painters, who designed his own costumes frequently, did his own makeup, and his roles were just embedded. To this day, people try to imitate his roles. You know the name Caruso, maybe you remember that name. Very important in the culture, in the early recording days, in the popular magazines. Everybody would say, what do you think you are, Caruso? You wish. We had Pavarotti and the La Boheme that many of you watched after the session we did on that opera together. Huge star. And also in Cenerentola, Flores. There's so many amazing singers. Just tell me, that's a whole world. That's a whole world. How they get there. They all start as kids. They take music. They have good voices. They have great voices. They still got to have the breaks. They got to have the teachers. They got to have the opportunities. And each one has a story. Just as each successful sports figure, there's a story. Some of them are unbelievable. I happen to think in opera that they are unbelievable stories. That's it. I love the story. Even if you don't want the opera, you love the stories. Now, in the 19th century is where stuff really started happening. Let's just roll over the top of the waves. because everything I've been through already is kind of the basis. Things change. There's two movements. One is something called bel canto, which picks up with what was going on with the coloratura in the seria and the funny opera, the commedia, I mean, the buffa and the seria. This coloratura singing, it's Italian, it's a type of breathing, it's a type of training. Beautiful singing is what it means. And so those of you who watch Cenerentola heard it. So there's beautiful singing. You say, well, singing is beautiful. I know, but this was a specific kind of training and melodies. And there's these guys, I call them the A-E-I-O. There's not any use, because a lot of the Italian names end with an A or an E, or especially I's, some with or A's, right? The vowel guys. I remember one time I actually won something on the classical radio show years ago in Dallas, the WRR. I'd call in, and that's so funny now. And they wanted to name an Italian composer whose name did not begin with A-E-I or O. And I can't even remember which one I gave. But I won 2 tickets to something. It never happens for me. But most of them were. Rossini, Donizetti, Bellini, you can't go wrong with any of this stuff. You really can't. And what were they doing? They had the beautiful singing style. They had a lot of the virtuosic coloratura. They wrote buffa. They wrote seria. They didn't do dialogue operas. Italian is, it's musical when you just say hello. If you say, where's the cleaning rag? It's already sounds like you're singing. They did the recitative, the sung speech that was free form. But they also got into the Gothic, the spooky novels, La Sonnambula by Bellini, the sleepwalker, or this poor girl gets in all kind of a mess because she doesn't know she's sleepwalking. There's a lot of mad scenes going, Lucia de Lammermoor, based on Sir Walter Scott's novel. Oh, that is a sad story. Lucia de Lammermoor. Oh my gosh, that's incredible stuff. And they had fabulous quartets, quintets, sextets, septets, where all these voices are singing. One's lamenting, one's scheming, one's crying, one's happy, and you can hear it all. Then, again, if you're interested in this, if you did not see La Cenerentola, I've got an hour on this, and it covers a lot of this history, but a whole lot in Cenerentola, and you can get that production either. Lots of them are available online, or you can rent the same production I talked about on the Met, but there's many, many others. Cinderella. And you will find my talk there on my Vimeo channel, vimeo.com/Professor Carol. You'll find a lot of stuff there. And it's chronological, so I think you have to go back 3 things and you'll see it. Cenerentola, Cinderella. You'll get a lot of sense of that. The other big thing you have is Wagner. Wagner, German composer, who, again, very little time to talk a lot about Wagner, except to tell you who's a game changer. Total game changer. It's like electricity. There's before electricity and there's after electricity. Okay? Here's the house. Before electricity, 20 years later after electricity, or 40 or whatever. Among the things he did to opera, he wrote almost solely opera, is he created a whole new way of looking at almost everything. He's writing in German. He could have just done dialogue operas, but he looks for a way to do recitative in German that sounds right to German, that still, and I'm not going to pretend to sing it to you, that doesn't sound like Italian or French or try to, but in German, in the flow of the German language, but still has this nobility and integrity that would be for the German sounds, not trying to fit the Italian patterns. But you can't make that work. Some tried. And he created themes, identity themes, signature themes that we call leitmotif or leading motives. Well, I'll come back to that in a second, for just a second. Wagner spells the end of that number opera where you have the overture, then you have the recitative, then you have the aria, then you have the duet, he's going to do a through compose where it starts and it flows. I mean, there will be arias and there will be some duets, but it's going to be a flow. You don't have double bars and turn the page. The overture, he's going to call a prelude. It's not going to fit the patterns that have been done before. And they're going to be gorgeous. They're going to be these orchestral, wild, wonderful things. He will do the Flying Dutchman, where he figures out a lot of his ideas, which is based on a ship. Well, he was in a ship that almost wrecked. He was in a stormy sea, and a lot of his operas deal with the sea, one way or the other, or the river, or the Rhine. Crazy stuff, wonderful stuff. He will write, The Ring is the main thing. We have no time to talk about The Ring per se. That's its own boot camp. But there's that leitmotif. What do I mean by it? From the German verb to guide or lead, leiten, to lead. And when I do my tours in Germany, I'm a Tourleiterin, or in Austria, Tourleiterin, tour leader. Got it? Leitmotif, leading motive. And we know this from cell phones. I made this point when I spoke in the one on La Boheme that I did, which you can also find on my Vimeo channel. That we kind of have, a lot of you have phone set up so that if your child calls, it's dee 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 dee, and then if your work calls, it's da 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 da, right? It does that, right? And then another one goes beep 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 beep. We kind of get the idea of tunes. What this means? This is Wagner. This is a long time ago. He had all these themes. Dum ba da 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 dum for the Rhine, and except it would be, and I don't have time to make all these sounds, but we'd have the da dum da dum. Bum 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 da 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 da. Siegfried's motor bum ba da da. And there were all these different themes. Bum ba da dum, the Valkyrie, ba da 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 da. You know. You've heard these, right? You hear them in cartoons, right? But they were like a guide, a musical guide. It was like a map, and you could be one place and hear the melody for something that's going to happen 50 minutes later, or in the next opera in the Ring. But you'd hear the sword motive, but you haven't even gotten to that yet. And Wagner put this whole system of melodies together. It was unbelievable, complicated and simple both. Some composers will call them reminiscence motives later on. Wagner's basically the first, not exactly the first, but largely the first, and boy, on what a scale. Just put that away and think about it. It's one of the reasons it's glorious and complex and rewarding and involving and long and emotionally demanding and rewarding. I'm not going to be able to tell you about that tonight. I did. If you watch the La Boheme one, you'll see why I talked about J. Hunter Morris. But we have to stand schedule because you guys got to go to bed, some of you, and some of you haven't had dinner. This last thing that happens in the 19th century that I'll quickly speak about is verismo, which means realism. Verily, verily, I say unto you, verisimilitude, truth. And these last three guys, Mascagni, Verdi, and Puccini, are among the many Italians who start doing this realism. We might call it blood and gore kind of stuff. You know, it's not that nobody ever got murdered in the other operas or bad things, especially in the serious ones. They were tragic stories from history. But now we're after very sad things where things are happening on stage. Terrible things are happening off stage. It's not that terrible compared to what we do in movies today, but it was realism. And you try to get each character to seem so real that you almost want to say, stop! And the situations are sad. And there's, you know, these guys were all about psychological stories and gorgeous music and big orchestras. There's no more number opera where you get to breathe and turn the page. It's just going and going. You have something called scene and aria. I think a slide will come up with that. I'm not sure. It may have dropped out. Who knows where it is? Scena ed aria, which would be, you'd have the scene where there would be this and kind of some recitative and then some luscious kind of stuff. And then something else would come in and a duet. And then somebody would drop out and someone else would come in. And it's all one long, big, glorious thing. Beautiful, realistic. And the emotions were real, and people would die of consumption, and people would lose one another because socially they could not be together, and one would be noble and yet die of a broken heart, and all this stuff. And if you want to get into this, some of this is better example than other, but the two guys that matter, I mean, Mascagni is quite famous too, but Verdi and Puccini is probably what you're going to start with. You might look at Aida because it's quite famous. I have to say that I don't generally send people initially to Aida. I would rather send them to Otello. Whoa. Then you sort of have that Seria classical plots, right? Brought into a modern, luscious, verismo type of opera. Verdi's Otello, if you're a Shakespeare person. Oh my goodness. And there's movie versions of it as well. That'll just, all right. Tosca by Puccini. Woohoo! There's one for you. Again, these things are not light evenings, but they're gorgeous. And, you know, you just can't get better stuff. You can't. I guess you could, but I don't know where. Modern, realistic. The recitative, much more like a real dialogue, a real speaking. Not so much stylized, not so much virtuosic. Parlando style. La Boheme, which we focused on, and there is this, I'll show you, I think it comes up next. Oh, well, they'll come in a second. These are some of the Puccini operas. Madame Butterfly, there's a tearjerker. Wonderful history there. The Girl of the Golden West, which is kind of silly and fun. That's kind of not so very much Verismo. But again, Turandot, the triptych, Manon Lescaut, La Bohème, Tosca for Puccini. You can write me if you need more suggestions. I'll give you. And this is the La Bohème that I mentioned when you go to my Vimeo channel, vimeo.com/professorcarol. Actually, this is the address for it. You'll find the Cinderella one, which has a lot of information. It's fun. It's kind of a fun session. People said it was a very fun session. And I think it is. And we go slower in some things and more in detail in a lot of things. And then also the La Bohème one, which has a lot of history, but also really focuses on that opera and that beautiful, beautiful, beautiful music in that opera. Okay. So there's some resources. And I want to tell you guys, if you're not familiar, the Met right now, I don't know if I think they're still streaming. They've been doing it for 8 or 9 weeks, giving every night a performance that they're streaming free. It's part of their subscription, but they're giving everybody it free. You can be a subscriber to the Met, I think, for about $14 a month and watch opera till the cows come home, and any one you want, including the performances that we've already talked about that were on those Vimeo lectures or talks or sessions or webinars. But you have to remember that it is an adult entertainment. So what I would say, if you've got your middle schoolers, your upper elementary, modern productions can be modern productions. And you can always call the Met during the day and they will tell you. You can ask the questions, make sure you get yourself and say, I'm really thinking about, or you just watch a little bit of it and say, oh, this is just too dark, or they said it in The Gangster, this is supposed to be in a ballroom and they've got these guys all running around. You can decide. Some of the modern productions are very interesting and they work. Some of them are a little off, you decide. Or you get the older productions. And also the Met on Saturdays, once the new season starts in September, matinees streamed live to your movie theaters, which are fantastic to go to. You eat your popcorn, you drink your hot tamales and your hot dog and your pickle, and you're in jeans, and you feel as if you're in a $300 seat. Right there. And you feel that in these streaming things online if you do and they're not the only theater. Lots of theaters all over the world are doing this. The point is, they take you backstage, you get to meet, I always say, the animal trainer, the costume designer, the guy that just got killed at the end of Act 1 and covered in exhaustion, and he stands up and goes, hello, Mom, backstage, of course, not in front of the camera, right? And then he talks about how this role all his life as a little kid dreamed about singing it, and you go, these are real people. It's really, really, really interesting. Okay. Now, here's what we've done, and we're quitting. We've gone through these terms: the comic opera, the seria, the dialogue. I mentioned the Singspiel, the ballad opera that the different countries call them different things when they talk, sing, or a Broadway, right? We spent a lot of time on Buffa, talking about the Commedia dell'arte, Italian Renaissance, comic puppet theater, street theater, going back to the Greeks, characters, stock characters, and the seria with the ancient history and the Greek and Roman history, and all of the coloratura, incredible singers, and the male heroes pushed up into the female role, or female voice, I should say, or the high heroic voice, if what we talk about it with the castrati. And we went through these terms that are important. What an aria is with the pulse, all the songs, they're songs, as opposed to the recitative that you just have to get over the hump and realize that you may not talk that way, but in opera they do, and actually get very used to it. You can even start doing it in your kitchen. We do it in our house all the time. Who's going to make dinner tonight? I've done it the last 5 nights. Okay, everybody, it's dishes. I don't want to do dishes. Yes, you do. No, I do not want to do dishes, but I think you're going to. So there. That's recitative, okay? Coloratura, which you and I mostly are not trained to sing, but people are, and it's glorious, and it's gorgeous, and it's athletic, and it's marvelous. The idea of a number opera, and then there's that term, scena ed aria, leitmotif, those marvelous these themes that would be woven. Not just Wagner set it up; he did it in these huge, magnificent operas. But and to this day, people use it, and you hear it in Broadway. Themes that come up that we know who that is or what that is, and verismo, realism. Now, what I did not do is get into the 20th century, although I sure would like to, because things will stay the same and they will change. And I love 20th century opera. There are so many amazing works building on everything we've just talked about. But that's a different talk. That's a different boot camp. If you're looking, and some of you asked me even before tonight, and you wrote me, I'm going to leave this up a second. What should I try to get familiarity with? At least the rest in an aria or a scene or an act of a Baroque opera. Go to Julius Caesar. Learn a whole one. Go watch a whole one. Why not? Do Monteverdi, the very beginnings of it. You'll see some different styles from the Renaissance, pastoral. I mean, it's not going to be like something 100 years later, so stylized and polished, but it's really what. Just a little snippet of that is great. Juan Buffa, Barber of Seville, Marriage of Figaro. I love Cenerentola, but there's many others. Elixir of Love. Get Don Giovanni, which is, he called it a dramma giacosa, a jolly drama. It wasn't a buffa. I mean, he's dragged off to hell. That's not that funny. He earned it. And it wasn't a seria. It's not ancient history and classical mythology. So he called it a jolly drama, dramma giacosa, which is actually a subgenre, very small. It's great work. Wonderful productions available. Fabulous. It's Mozart's best opera. Get a V work by Verdi or something with Verismo with Puccini. Get some familiarity, at least with part of one of those. A little bit of Wagner. We'll have to talk about 20th century choices. I love some things like Peter Grimes, Wozzeck, the Rake's Progress. Oh my gosh, there's so many things that I don't have time to tell you now. But we'll come back. We're coming back because we're doing this course called A Night of the Opera, okay? It's just getting cranked up. And one of the dialogue operas, you can do Magic Flute. Magic Flute is a Singspiel dialogue opera. You already have a bunch of them. Broadway, right? Right? We're done. You have finished Opera Boot Camp. Now you get to go take a hot bath and you get to have dinner or go to bed or wherever you are. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and see if there's things. Someone has said that the Met's still streaming. I just saw that go by. I am so happy. I know a lot of people had to go to bed. Someone has said the Met's still up. The video from the intermission. I will type that in. Let me type that in just a minute. How is opera relevant now at the time of the pandemic and protest? Oh my gosh, that is a fantastic question. And I will say a word in my best effort. Let me see if I can get that. You must go. Did I went way over, didn't I? I'm so sorry. Okay, but not too bad. A lot of you knew you had to go to bed, and I'm glad you went, and I'm glad a lot of you stayed. And I will type in, let me find that link, and I can get it up right now. It won't be hard. Here we go. Let's see. I think I can get it in. Here it is, and I'll put it in the chat box. Let me get rid of that. Okay, here it comes. At least I hope it comes. Oh, that's a search one. Oh dear. You were very, very, yeah. I mean, the West Coast, you guys always have all the bad times. This time it's the East that had to go to sleep, right? Let me see. Let me try this. No, that's it. That is really it. It's so beautiful. Da da dum bum bum bum. Let me double check that. You see? I hope I didn't just cut myself off. That's it. But you know what I would do? I just type Monteverdi Orfeo, and then I waited for that one to come up. I hope that will do it. I hope that does it. I know a lot of you still here. You talked about the let me see, chat. You talked about opera in the pandemic. Well, you know, the Met, I think what they've done and everything else that's happening, oh my goodness. Oh, I love what you wrote, Rhonda, about, we're going to put the recording of this up. And it's not going to be necessarily the final version of this, all right? And it will be on Vimeo for those of you who had to go to bed or haven't gotten up yet. And Odette, or Odette, I don't know how you say your name, Ianetta, what a beautiful name, my goodness. You know, the Met, I think when they started this, probably thought when they started streaming at night, and I mean, there's so many other people doing theater, the arts in general, thought, well, this is a great opportunity. A, we hope we get some supporters because we're all going to go broke. and we might not be able to get, people will come back and people will want to support the arts more. But I think what they ended up doing, a whole lot of people, not just these people, I mean, the masterclass series, some of you might know about, where some of the great artists are putting together things. I think everybody has figured out, among other things, that life without the arts is dark. Life without community is dark. And opera is not about silly stories. You say the stories are silly, but heroic legends are not silly. William Tell's not silly. It's, if you start examining it, it's silly. Superman's not silly. It's, some of the modern versions are a little silly. He always has to call Wonder Woman and Spider-Man to get anything done. Our Superman didn't. He could do it all, But if you really look at the virtues and the values of the fables and the fairy tales and these stories, they're strong. And I think they shock us sometimes with just how strong. And we live in this, I call it sort of the Starbucks latte land. And I think we absolutely totally forget the power of what has happened before us and around us. And we're just getting here now. So I just think the message of the arts right now has kept a lot of people from crawling the walls. It's given perspective. We are going to need a lot more of it in upcoming days based on what's happening now. And I think everybody knows of what I say. Healing, inspiring, calming, expressive. And I am so glad that you have enjoyed it. Those of you who are writing, A Vision of Beauty. Yeah, the Grand Theatre. Yeah, thank you for writing that. And that should be it. And it should come up and you'll see that little oval with the Monteverdi. Write me if you need anything. If you need one of the lists or the names. We went through a lot. You guys were great troopers hanging in there. I want to thank you for being there. I think we will probably be meeting again. And I will look forward to sharing this course with you. And all the people that are from my circle of scholars will have more fun than ever. And there's a lot there that you all do. And I love that you are there with us in the circle, even if you're there for 1 month, or if you're there for 5 months or a year or 4 years, depending on your family. So I will probably say thank you, and we will be visiting with you. I look forward the next time.